One of the videos which contributes to an understanding of Katy Perry's Wide Awake is E.T., in which there's a descent into the depths. And this one is mirrored to some extent in the video Part of Me. And the movie as well. In many respects, it's about someone who's a fractured person and can't do all the things at once that would be part of a full life because of the demands of being on tour and performing. In Part of Me's video, we have an instance of a young woman being possibly lied to by her boyfriend. It's not quite certain that she wants to take control of her life and leaves the boyfriend and goes off to join the army. So here we have one instance of someone possibly being manipulated and lied to, and then putting herself into a circumstance where she's likely to be manipulated and lied to even more. Because in war, it's said that the first casualty of war is truth. A big part of war today is propaganda. If you're going to be fighting war, you're probably going to be lying to someone else or being lied to. Also, there's an element of shooting, as in several of the previous videos I've discussed, because she's learning how to become a soldier. There are costume changes, as in the previous 3 videos. This one is not as complex as in E.T., where there are multiple costume changes, but the costume change, once again, involves the breasts. Katy Perry cuts off her own hair before even going to join the Marines, and therefore inflicts on her the loss of individuality that the armed forces normally do when they recruit people. And she also wraps up her breasts to make them look flatter, as opposed to California girls where they have cupcakes put on them and she sprays whipped cream out on the audience. So there are several of these elements that are present in the previous videos, once again. But in this one, you get a couple of more clues as to how to interpret what goes on in the video Wide Awake. She's gone through the descent of the Greek myth of the origin of climate, which is the abduction of Persephone. And because this woman is in the underworld a certain proportion of the year, that was the Greeks' explanation as to why there were seasons, because her absence would cause grieving and the plants wouldn't grow. In warfare, you are trained to be broken down and then put back together again in a way that will be useful for you to go out and kill people. And this is also the process that many mythological characters go through when they go into the underworld and try to come back out again. The old personality is broken down, and there's a death, literal or figurative, and then the person has to try to rebuild again. And this journey can often produce these changes that are essentially self-inflicted because the character chooses to go down into the underworld. Now, in Katy Perry's character's case, joining the military, it seems that she's possibly overreacting because we don't know just how bad the boyfriend's transgression was. And she's avoiding one kind of sacrifice, which is future marriage, and then chooses one that's possibly even worse because she's learning to go shoot people and possibly get killed herself. In the verses of Part of Me, she says that the lover, is taking her light from her and chews her up and spits her out as if she were poison, which is supposedly a very bad thing to do to someone. And yet, when we get to the video Wide Awake, there's a poisoned strawberry in the underworld, and she does exactly that. She's taking someone else's energy, then that enables her to produce light after she's done it, and what she takes the energy from is poisonous, so she would essentially have to spit it out afterwards as well. So once again we have Katy Perry saying that there's someone else who's done something bad to her, and yet she does exactly the same thing herself. The product of this energy exchange is that she's made a deal, more or less, with Hades, the underworld, and that she can have this power to sparkle and glow and so on. But once you've taken power from that source, you owe a debt to it, and you have to go back, and aren't completely free of it ever again. In the second verse of Part of Me, you have her talking about glowing and sparkling and not being able to take her soul, or break her soul. But is this a productive sort of glowing and sparkling? Where'd she get the energy to do it? And it seems that it gets derived by rather destructive means. Especially when you look at the meanings of the word sparkling these days, when you have Twilight being such a popular phenomenon. In Twilight, the cover shows the choices made by someone who chooses to eat a fruit that's poison in a manner of speaking as well, and that gives the promise of power, but also requires you to be undead in order to gain the power. So we see that happening again in Part of Me, which tells us how to interpret part of Wide Awake. When the descent happens, it talks about gravity, someone realizing that gravity is real and falling down from Cloud 9, which was shown in California Girls, Cloud 9. Then, when hitting bottom, there's of course a shock. It feels good to fall at first, but then there's a shock when you hit bottom. And after that point, there's this echoing sound all around in the background. And you wonder if the person is really wide awake or not. Or has just chosen something worse. This has to do with the complexity that's introduced in the video Wide Awake, and the difficulty of finding one's way out of the underworld, which has a number of gates and false leads. In other words, it's a labyrinth, and therefore there's another element of a Greek myth that's introduced, that of Theseus and the Minotaur. The labyrinth is a place that's the opposite for Katy Perry's characters of California Girls. California Girls, there weren't very many severe consequences, apparently, and she did the eating. When you, in the myth, are put into the labyrinth, you're there to be eaten, and it's a deadly serious game. The Minotaur was fed by sacrifices of young Athenian men and women, because King Minos of Crete could attack and go to war with Athens, and they thought probably beat them. So, in order to fight the war the best way they could, they would send sacrifices of young men and women to the labyrinth to be eaten by the Minotaur every few years. Much like sending soldiers to fight a war. So the Part of Me video has to do with being sacrificial young people sent out to die, as seen in the labyrinth in Wide Awake.